at my daughter's wedding, they hid me behind a column. I made one call that changed everything." Margaret Whitman's heart felt like it might burst with a mix of pride and nerves as she stood just outside the grand ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton, the city lights shimmering through the huge glass windows. Satin ribbons and delicate flower arrangements twirled in soft pastel hues around the chandeliers overhead, and marble pillars stretched toward the high ceilings, making everything feel impossibly elegant, and to Margaret, a little intimidating. She shifted her weight, wincing slightly as the familiar ache in her right hip throbbed beneath the folds of her modest, well-worn dress. She touched the scar just above her ankle, a reminder of a car accident 6 years ago. The limp it left wasn't dramatic, but enough to make her feel noticeably different from the polished crowd flowing past her. She glanced down at the simple silver bracelet on her wrist, the one gift Alyssa had insisted she wear tonight. A smile softened Margaret's lips. Her daughter, Alyssa, with the kind of smile that could light up an entire room, was about to marry Fyodor Martin, the son of one of the city's most influential families. This was more than a wedding. It was the culmination of years of hard work, sacrifice, and late nights balancing 2 jobs so Alyssa could have every opportunity Margaret never did. But as she stepped forward, her stiff legs propelling her through the throng, Margaret felt the first prick of unease. 2 sharply dressed ushers in navy uniforms intercepted her with polite but firm expressions. "Mrs. Whitman, please, this way," one said, nodding toward a narrow space just behind a tall, ornate column, partially shielding her from the rest of the room. Margaret's heart sank. She hesitated, confusion mixing with embarrassment. I was told I'd have a seat among the family." The usher's jaw tightened slightly. "There's been a slight change, ma'am. Your seat is reserved here, behind the column, to keep the main area clear for the wedding party and their guests." Margaret swallowed hard, glancing around. The front rows blossomed with silk gowns, polished cufflinks, and radiant smiles, all faces leaning forward toward Alyssa and Fyodor, bathed in the warm glow of candlelight. Behind the column, Margaret felt like an afterthought, her presence almost hidden from view. She settled into the small chair, the cushion a bit too stiff and the space cramped. The muffled music from the string quartet drifted through the air, punctuated by soft laughter and clinking glasses. Margaret's fingers knotted tightly in her lap. She wanted to tell Alyssa, wanted to protest, but the tight knot of pride and dread lodged itself in her throat. The murmur of guests barely reached her ears, dimmed by the pillar's cold marble. Every time the crowd's applause swelled, Margaret reached instinctively to locate Alyssa in the sea of faces, but saw only flashes of a radiant smile, a fluttering veil, a glimpse of the dress that Margaret herself had helped pick out on a chilly autumn afternoon. A sudden sting pricked behind her eyes. This was supposed to be her moment too, the day she'd finally step out of the shadows of doubt and prove she belonged. But instead she was tucked away, shielded like a forgotten painting behind a wall, part of the scenery and nothing more. Margaret's breath hitched as she fought the rising tide of humiliation. The gentle tap of her shoe against the floor echoed a steady rhythm, a silent reminder that she was here, and she would not vanish entirely, no matter how small the space they gave her. Ahead, Alyssa's voice floated clearly on the soft notes of the wedding vows. Beautiful, strong, and filled with hope. And in that moment, Margaret decided quietly, fiercely, that she would find her way back into the light. Margaret sat stiffly behind the ornate column, her heart clenched tight in her chest as the ceremony unfolded just beyond her guarded nook. The soft murmur of guests mixing with the delicate strains of the violin seemed worlds away, like she was both too close and entirely too far. As the bridal party glided down the aisle, the polished faces of Fyodor's family turned always away from her, focused entirely on their own meticulously arranged tableau. Margaret's eyes strained to catch Alyssa's glowing smile, but the pillar's shadow swallowed much of the view. Every attempt to catch a friendly glance, a nod of recognition, was met with averted eyes or distracted glances. The wedding planners flitted around briskly, clipboard in hand, stopping occasionally near her but never speaking. One young assistant flicked her eyes over Margaret's crisp but plainly styled dress, an angling limp, then whispered brisk instructions to the nearest usher with a dismissive glance. Margaret could feel even from behind the stone. Then Patricia Martin appeared, the groom's mother, all polished poise and sharp-edged smiles. Patricia's eyes swept the room before zeroing in, unsettlingly calm, on Margaret's obscured figure. "Mrs. Whitman," she said with a voice as smooth and controlled as the expensive silk of her gown, "it's really best if you don't draw attention. We wouldn't want to distract the guests with anything unexpected." The clipped emphasis on unexpected was a jab wrapped in civility. Margaret clenched her fists in her lap, wanting to retort, but knowing it would only provoke more scrutiny. She managed a tight nod, lips pressed thin. Behind her, whispers swirled like a chilling breeze, snippets of conversation floating untidily through the marble halls. "Did you see how she's seated, hidden by that pillar, almost like some kind of afterthought? I hear she's from humble beginnings, not quite the right fit for Theodore's crowd. Patricia's really making sure this wedding is perfect. No distractions, no complications." The photographers, moving with practiced efficiency, snapped group after group of smiling families and polished friends. Not once did their lenses drift Margaret's way. She might as well have been invisible. Her throat grew dry as she realized no one planned to capture a picture of the woman who had raised the bride. A shudder ran through her as faint laughter echoed from the front. Alyssa's voice rang clear and joyful, weaving through vows and promises. But the joy didn't reach Margaret here. It was locked behind walls of quiet exclusion. She could only imagine how Alyssa beamed, unaware of the cold shoulder her mother was enduring. The faint scent of jasmine and freshly cut roses mingled with the distant clink of champagne glasses rising for toasts. But to Margaret, the room no longer smelled like celebration. It smelled of rejection, all wrapped in the glittering trappings of a facade designed to showcase status, not love. Margaret's fingers twitched involuntarily, brushing a loose strand of gray hair. The ache in her chest deepened, a heavy reminder that this day, which should have been hers in full, was being parceled out in carefully measured doses, with her confined to the margins. Still, under the weight of all this, a quiet ember glowed inside her. If this was the role they scripted for her, unseen, unheard, she wondered, was there a way to rewrite the story? To stake her place not just as the mother of the bride, but as a woman deserving of respect and love. As the ceremony moved toward the exchange of rings, a sudden flush of determination washed over Margaret. She would not disappear entirely today. But how? And what would it cost her to be seen for who she truly was? In this fragile moment, surrounded by whispered judgments and veiled hostility, a question settled in her heart. Could she keep her dignity intact when the world was trying so hard to erase her? Margaret sat quietly at the small round table near the kitchen doorway, her hands resting on her lap as the noise of the reception buzzed just out of clear reach. The open kitchen's clatter of pots and pans and murmurs of staff felt almost like a refuge from the imposing ballroom, filled with neatly dressed strangers whose laughter bounced off the gold-trimmed walls. She stole glances toward the front, where guests raised their glasses for toasts, framed by tall vases heavy with roses and peonies. Alyssa's sparkling eyes shone every time the crowd cheered, but Margaret sat apart, isolated in a corner world of whispered silences. She had made a few attempts earlier to find a better vantage point. When the photographers called for family pictures, she rose, smoothing the front of her navy blue dress, but was gently but firmly guided back toward her distant seat by an organizer with a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mrs. Whitman, please, these seats are set," came the polite yet unyielding voice. Each time she tried to merge closer, an invisible barrier kept her tucked at the margins, an unwelcome outsider. Margaret's heart ached deeper than she expected it to. The sting wasn't just about the seat at the far table, but what it symbolized. As Theodore's family guests mingled nearby, she overheard Patricia, the groom's mother, speaking loudly enough for a small cluster to catch every word, her tone dripping with self-assurance that masked a sharp edge. "We've truly elevated Alyssa's background tonight," Patricia said, her voice smooth but bitterly proud, eyes sparkling with the sense of a victory. "It was about ensuring a future that's fitting for our family." Margaret's breath caught. Elevated? Was she nothing more than a hurdle to be overcome? A mark of something unworthy to be displayed? The fire inside her flickered, a hurt that bit deep but didn't consume all hope. Then, from beside the table, an older waiter approached, his silver hair slightly tousled and kind eyes crinkled at the corners. He leaned in quietly, lowering his voice so no one else could hear. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said softly. "I just wanted to say, it's clear to me you're the real heart here. I see how she looks at you. You've done something right, no matter what they say." Margaret blinked back sudden tears, the warmth of kindness washing over the cold sting of rejection. She swallowed hard and nodded, managing a rueful smile. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'm just trying to be there for her. I want her to see me." The old waiter gave a small nod. Sometimes people forget the things that really matter. They get caught up in appearances. But your love shines through no matter where you're sitting. Margaret's gaze lifted as the music shifted, soft jazz filling the air while glasses chimed in celebration. She glimpsed Alyssa from a distance, her face alive with joy as she laughed with guests whose smiles never quite reached their eyes when she glanced their way. A new determination resolved in Margaret's chest. She might be sitting hidden, unheard, but she was still there, still the mother Alyssa loved. This wasn't the end of her story tonight, not by a long shot. Her fingers curled into fists on the table as a quiet vow took shape inside her. She wouldn't stay invisible, not while Alyssa needed her. And maybe, just maybe, she could find an unexpected way through the silence and the shadows. For now, though, she stayed seated, patient yet watchful, heart tinged with hope and an unspoken promise that her time was coming. Could one small spark in a night full of polished smiles grow into a flame strong enough to bring her out from behind the curtain? Only time would tell. The ballroom sparkled like a dream, golden candlelight flickering across the polished wood floors and threading its way through the crystal chandeliers overhead. The air was thick with the scent of jasmine and peony, mingling with the soft hum of laughter and clinking glasses. On the raised stage, Alyssa and Theodore, radiant in their new titles as husband and wife, stood hand in hand, glowing beneath the spotlight. The audience erupted into cheers and applause. Margaret stood alone near the edge of the crowd, a silent shadow amidst the celebration. Her slight limp, usually hidden beneath the modest sweep of her gown, felt suddenly heavy and undeniable. Her fingers trembled, curling into fists at her sides as she watched the scene unfold, and yet she was not truly part of it. The expected role she dreamed of, the mother, standing proudly beside her daughter, was nowhere to be found. Instead, she was painfully aware of the whispers darting around the room like ravens. Eyes shifted pointedly away from her, or lingered just long enough to stab with unspoken judgment. And then came the final blow, when the mother-daughter dance was announced, a tradition Margaret had imagined sharing for months. She found herself utterly omitted. From the center of the room, Patricia's voice gleamed with false warmth, carrying over the murmur. "Mrs. Whitman has graciously declined to participate due to health reasons," she said smoothly, eyes watching Margaret from across the room. The statement landed like a stone, echoing around the walls. Margaret felt the heat rise in her cheeks, a mix of shame, disbelief, and a piercing sorrow that chased daylight from her eyes. How utterly invisible must she have been for her absence to be accepted without question? The hurt was raw, swelling beneath her ribs like a silent storm. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, blurring the golden glow of the chandeliers into soft halos as she clenched her jaw to keep them at bay. The music shifted to a gentle waltz, the couples gathering on the dance floor, all but blind to the figure standing alone at the edges. She could hear low murmurs now, the whispers thickening with cruel assumptions. Shouldn't she be dancing with the bride? Such a shame she doesn't want to be part of the celebration. She never really fit in anyway. Margaret's breath hitched. Years of sacrifice, every late night working 2 jobs, every missed vacation, every small denial made so her daughter could have more, felt as if they'd been erased, dismissed, crushed beneath the weight of a stained glass moment she was not allowed to enter. The room, full of celebration, suddenly felt like a gilded cage, weighted with cold, silken threads of rejection. Alone, she stepped back further, seeking the quiet solace of a nearby alcove. Her fingers trembled as she brushed hot tears from her cheeks, the lump in her throat tightening with relentless force. She glanced once more toward Alyssa, who smiled brightly on the dance floor, unaware of the loneliness looming so close. The distance between them felt endless, a chasm carved not out of hate, but of proud demands and silent exclusions. Margaret's heart broke, but somewhere inside, beneath the weight of all this pain, a small, stubborn spark whispered that this could not be the final chapter. Though she felt flattened beneath the injustice of the moment, her spirit refused to shatter. For all the humiliation, the coldness, and the stifling silence, they had not yet heard her voice, and Margaret Whitman meant to make sure they would. But, for now, tears fell quietly as she stood wrapped in the brittle stillness of her own heartbreak, the night stretching long and uncertain before her. As the music swelled again around the room, a thought began to take root, one that promised change was coming, no matter how impossible it seemed in this lonely, painful moment. Did she have the strength to fight back, to reclaim even a fragment of the love and respect she deserved? The question hung heavy in the air, answered only by the distinct clink of raised glasses and the soft, hopeful echo of a mother's love, determined to endure. The hallway outside the ballroom was dimmer, quieter, a sterile corridor lined with muted cream walls and polished wooden floors, a world apart from the glittering chaos inside. Margaret pressed her palms against her eyes, her breath shaky and uneven, as tears she hadn't allowed herself to shed during the reception spilled free. Her cheeks glistened with sadness and exhaustion, yet beneath that sheen of vulnerability, something new was beginning to take root. A steely resolve to understand what had just happened and why. Taking a ragged breath, she fumbled for her phone in her clutch. The screen lit up, and there, unexpectedly, was a message from Alyssa. It had been scheduled earlier to arrive right at the wedding's start, a tender reminder of the bond that tethered them beyond this social storm. The text read, "Mom, I want to be just like you. Always have. Love you." Margaret's lips trembled into a small, grateful smile. But it was swallowed quickly by the reality waiting behind the doors. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, trying to gather the fragments of dignity left to her. Her fingers tightened around the phone, just as the door behind her creaked open, and the familiar scruff of the kindly waiter appeared in the frame. "I'm sorry to bother you again, Mrs. Whitman," he said quietly, his eyes flicking hesitantly from her glistening cheeks to the floor. "But I found something you might want to see." He extended a cream-colored envelope with elegant gold embossing, a misplaced invitation meant for the head table. Curiosity and confusion mingled in Margaret's chest as she unfolded it. Sure enough, her name was written carefully across the front, scripted in deep calligraphy. "It says here you were to have a seat at the head table, but that got overruled," the waiter added softly, a hint of regret in his tone. "I didn't want you to think this was an accident." Margaret's heart clenched hard. Exclusion wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate. The weight of that single detail shifted something inside her. For years, she'd tried quietly to blend into the background, to accept that her modest means and quiet life made her less than worthy in this rarefied world. Yet now, the truth pressed like a cold stone against her ribs. The orchestrated attempt to erase her presence was not just an attack on her, but a wound inflicted on Alyssa as well. She thought of her daughter's radiant smile, so full of hope and love, unaware of the undercurrents that threatened to unravel their day. Patricia's pride had built walls that no one thought to tear down, but Margaret could see cracks beginning to form, if only she dared to speak. As she stood there, the gentle exhale of the hotel's air conditioning mingled with the faint echo of music from the ballroom, whispering of celebration and hidden pain. The waiter shifted his weight, as if weighing whether to say more. "Mrs. Whitman," he ventured, "sometimes people's definitions of family are too small to see the real bond. But truth has a way of coming out, and when it does, it changes everything." Margaret's eyes met his, and in that brief moment, a quiet courage pulsed beneath the surface of her heart. She wasn't alone, even if the room had pretended she was invisible. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, she felt ready to walk it, to fight, not just for her own dignity, but for Alyssa's future free from shadows. Pulling out her phone again, she glanced back at Alyssa's message one last time. "I want to be just like you." No matter the barriers, no matter the whispers, that love was her anchor. The tears weren't just for sorrow. They were seeds of something fierce and unyielding. Margaret straightened her shoulders, her pulse steadying. Her quiet determination was no longer just a flicker. It was a flame. The moment had come to rewrite the night's story. But how? And when? The answer waited in her fingertips' touch on the phone's call button. A single connection that might change everything. The music swelled through the grand ballroom, a tender melody that wrapped around the dancers like a silken thread. But Margaret Whitman's pulse pounded with a fierce urgency that shattered the delicate harmony from deep within her chest. Clutching her phone with trembling fingers, she steadied her breath, then lifted the device to her ear. "Alyssa?" Her voice was barely a whisper, trembling yet resolute as the call connected. The sound of music and laughter burst through the line, guests chatting and glasses clinking, before Alyssa's voice came softly, tinged with surprise. "Mom, are you okay? Where are you?" Margaret's throat tightened, but she managed to speak clearly. "I'm in the hallway, just outside the ballroom. Alyssa, I need you to listen. Something's wrong. I don't think they've been fair to me tonight. To us." A beat of silence. Then Alyssa's voice faltered, a mixture of concern and confusion. "We'll talk soon, Mom. Just hang on, okay?" "No," Margaret said firmly, her eyes burning with quiet fire. "Now, I need you to understand what's happening before it's too late." On the other end, Alyssa's whispered breath was there. The mother and daughter, linked by more than just blood, but by the unyielding threads of trust and love. Taking a deep breath, Alyssa stepped onto the dance floor, the light catching the tears glistening in her eyes. She reached the microphone, hesitating only briefly before raising it to her lips. The murmurs hushed, the crowd turning their gaze toward the bride. This night, this celebration, it was supposed to be about love and family. Alyssa began, voice steady but raw with emotion. And yet, there are parts of the story that haven't been told. All eyes shifted to Margaret, standing amidst the shadows near the edge of the room, heart pounding as though it might burst free. Alyssa's voice rang clear through the silence. "My mother, Margaret Whitman, was meant to have a place of honor tonight, a seat at the head table, not tucked away behind a pillar. But that was taken from her. She was excluded, ignored, even erased from moments she deserved to share." A murmur rippled through the guests, some shifting uncomfortably, others whispering behind their hands. Theodore's mother, Patricia, stood frozen, her polished smile faltering for a fraction of a second before hardening into silence. Alyssa's gaze held the room's attention as she reached out her hand, beckoning her mother forward. "Margaret, come stand with me." Margaret's breath caught, nerves and fear swirling into a dizzying mix, but her feet moved steadily forward. The room seemed to hold its breath as she stepped into the light. No longer hidden, no longer sidelined. As Margaret approached, a wave of supportive voices rose discreetly. Friends and distant relatives who had seen the kindness and tireless love she poured into her daughter's life. "Thank you, Alyssa," Margaret whispered, her voice steady now, with quiet strength. "I wanted to be here for my daughter, to celebrate her happiness, not to be invisible." Alyssa squeezed her mother's hand, tears shining on both their faces, as she faced the guests. "Tonight, I promise, no one's past or wealth will ever make us forget what truly matters: love, respect, and family." The crowd erupted into applause, genuine and warm this time, washing away the cold exclusion and replacing it with a new, vibrant energy. Patricia retreated toward the shadows, her expression unreadable, the power she'd held so tightly slipping from her grasp. Margaret smiled through the tears, feeling the weight lift and a new lightness fill her chest. The mother and daughter stood reunited at the heart of the celebration, visible, valued, and victorious. In that moment, Margaret knew something had shifted, not just among the guests clustered in the ballroom, but deep within herself. The humiliation that had tried to break her had been transformed by courage, by love's undeniable force. And with Alyssa by her side, she was ready to face whatever came next. Would you take a moment to reflect on the strength it takes to stand for yourself and those you love, even when you're pushed to the margins? Sometimes, the quietest voices create the loudest echoes. The ballroom, once filled with gleaming chandeliers and polished smiles, now pulsed with a new energy, tense, expectant, charged with the raw honesty that Alyssa had unleashed moments ago. Margaret stood beside her daughter's side, the warmth of Alyssa's hand anchoring her amidst a sea of whispered conversations and stunned faces. Where moments before she'd been hidden and ignored, now a spotlight bathed her in quiet dignity. Alyssa's voice, steady and clear, echoed once again through the room, cutting through the murmurs. "Tonight has shown me what truly matters: love, respect, and the courage to stand up for those we hold dear." Patricia Martin's practiced smile was gone. Her eyes, sharp and cold, flicked between guests and Margaret, the once commanding presence now diminished in the glow of truth. She took a step back, her impeccable poise cracking, revealing the unease bubbling beneath. Guests who had once whispered and glanced now met Margaret's gaze with newfound respect and some shock. A hushed ripple of murmurs spread as several guests approached Margaret, offering warm words and gentle pats on the shoulder. A distant cousin who had shared the head table with Patricia's circle now met Margaret's eyes squarely, nodding in quiet apology. Margaret's lips quivered, but her voice was firm as she addressed the gathering. "I raised Alyssa with love and sacrifice. I have always wanted what was best for her. Tonight I stand here not because of titles or wealth, but because family means everything." The room seemed to lean in, breath held in a collective embrace of understanding. Theodore glanced towards his mother, his expression softened but conflicted, caught between familial loyalty and the undeniable truth unveiled. Patricia finally stepped forward, her voice a fragile attempt at control. "This was never about exclusion. It was about maintaining standards." Alyssa's gaze hardened. "Standards? Is it a standard to hide the woman who gave me life? To erase my mother from my happiest day? No, that was cruelty, plain and simple." Margaret felt a swell of pride. She reached out, squeezing Alyssa's hand. The humiliation that had weighed on her all evening now transformed into a quiet power, fueled by love and fairness. With the music shifting to an uplifting, hopeful tune, Alyssa led her mother to the center of the ballroom, inviting guests to join the mother-daughter dance long denied. Couples moved aside respectfully, and the crowd embraced the moment with overwhelming applause and cheers. Margaret's footsteps faltered just once, the weight of the evening still lingering, before she smiled, a radiant, genuine expression that spoke of resilience and hope. As she and Alyssa swayed together, The whispered judgments faded, replaced by whispers of admiration. This is the night I reclaim my place, Margaret thought, her heart beating fiercely. Not just as a mother or a guest, but as a woman who refuses to be erased. Patricia retreated silently, her role diminished by the tide of justice and kindness washing over the room. It was a reckoning, quiet but unstoppable, a testament to the strength of truth. Margaret realized that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the choice to stand despite it. And standing here, with the music cradling her and her daughter's smile lighting the way, she was no longer invisible. Have you ever found yourself hidden in the shadows, only to discover that the brightest light can come from the fiercest determination to be seen? Sometimes, reclaiming your worth means stepping forward, even when all odds seem stacked against you. The soft glow of the ballroom lights bathed Margaret Whitman and her daughter, Alyssa, in a warm embrace, as their smiles radiated genuine joy. No longer shadows, but shining beacons of resilience. The crowd, now a gathered sea of supportive faces, had witnessed more than a wedding that night. They had witnessed a powerful reckoning, a mother reclaiming her place not through wealth or status, but through unwavering love and integrity. Margaret's heart swelled with a mixture of relief and pride. For months, even years, she had battled quiet doubts seeded by whispers and sideways glances, her moist clothes and slight limp too often marking her as less than worthy in Theodore's polished world. Tonight, those doubts had been swept away by something far grander than riches, a daughter's courage and a mother's steadfast spirit. As the last note of the waltz faded, Alyssa hugged Margaret tightly, whispering, "Mom, you're my hero. Thank you for never giving up on me, or on us." The embrace warmed Margaret's soul, healing more than the bruises of the evening. In that moment, all the pain, the silent slights, the moments of isolation dissolved into a profound sense of belonging. Margaret looked out at the guests, their faces softened by empathy and new understanding. Invitations to join in celebration were no longer veiled efforts to exclude, but worn gestures of inclusion. She caught sight of Patricia seated quietly alone, her earlier facade of control shattered by the unmistakable truth exposed under the spotlight. There was no triumph in Patricia's defeat, only the quiet weight of reflection. This night was not just about a wedding. It was about justice served without bitterness, about love prevailing over pride, and about the remarkable strength found in kindness and perseverance. Margaret's journey had taught her that true dignity comes not from one's surroundings or the approval of others, but from embracing one's worth with humility and courage. Alyssa nestled against her mother's side as they moved toward the exit, the city's cool night air a refreshing contrast to the warmth inside. The stars above seemed to shimmer a little brighter, a silent nod to their shared triumph. Margaret's gaze lifted, the burden of invisibility finally lifted, replaced by a resilient light that would never dim. Tonight was just the beginning, Margaret thought, a smile tugging at her lips. We have rewritten our story, one of love, respect, and unshakable truth. As they walked home hand in hand, Margaret knew the road ahead might still hold challenges, but with Alyssa by her side, no obstacle was insurmountable. The quiet woman once hidden behind a column had emerged, not just seen, but cherished. Have you ever faced a moment when the world tried to dim your light, only to find that your true strength shines brightest when you refuse to be erased? Sometimes the hardest trials lead us to the most beautiful awakenings. What part of your story needs a new chapter written with courage and love? If this story resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button. See you in our next story.